Great. It's great to have all of you here today, and I'll be introducing Jackie very quickly. One of our presenters is running a little bit late, Antonia Edwards, but she'll be joining us soon. So, and at this point, I will turn it over to Jackie. Jackie is the intern, the Civic Engagement, Leadership Development, and Research Intern at Everyday Democracy. She is a Master of Public Policy candidate at the University of Connecticut. And it pleases me a lot, and I'm very proud to introduce Jackie.
Thank you so much, Val. All right, well, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Thank you so much for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Public Policy Advocacy for Equitable Change workshop. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes to see if anyone trickles in, but we'll get started after that. All righty, so Antonia has just joined. She'll be here in just a second, so I think I'm going to get started. Alrighty, as Val mentioned, my name is Jackie, and I am a Master of Public Policy candidate at UConn, as well as a Civic Engagement, Leadership Development, and Research Intern at Everyday Democracy. And today I am going to be taking you all through a presentation on public policy process and an example of how this process can lead to inequitable outcomes. Following my presentation, I'm going to be introducing Civic Ambassadors Danielle Hubley and Antonia Edwards, who will be sharing their experiences with us. We will also do a Q&A in the last couple of minutes. And with that, let's get started. So what is public policy? Does anyone want to come off mute and say what they think about public policy, what comes to mind when you hear that? That's all right. Don't worry about it. So the definition we're going to be using today is public policy is what the government chooses to do or not do regarding a particular public issue by using laws and regulations. So how is public policy created? Public policy is created through the steps in the public policy circle. It is important to mention that the public policy circle is the best way to understand how public policy is created. However, the process is rarely this simple and stages can overlap, which you will notice as we go through them. So typically the process begins at agenda setting, and then moves to policy formulation, to legitimation, implementation, and evaluation. And for our purposes today, policy maintenance and evaluation will be combined into one step. So before we get into it, I just want to define some terms quickly. A stakeholder is a person, community organization, or a group who is impacted both negatively and positively by an issue and how it is handled. So the terms lobbying and lobbyists can have broad definitions depending on the context they are used in. For our purposes, we're going to be using the state of Connecticut's definition. Now, I did put the state of Connecticut's definition on the slide, but it's a little wordy. So to put it simply, lobbying is an attempt to influence the government action through either written or oral communication. And a lobbyist is essentially someone who lobbies on behalf of another for compensation. So the first step in the policy process is agenda setting and problem identification. Once an issue is identified, stakeholders from inside and outside the government will come together to offer solutions to the problem. But how are issues identified? In other words, who sets the agenda? The first is you, the public. For example, the public played a large role in stricter gun laws in Connecticut and the legalization of marijuana. The next is lawmakers. Lawmakers are responsible for putting issues on the formal agenda, which I will discuss in a minute. There are also a variety of factors that could play into a lawmaker's decision to bring an issue to the agenda, such as constituent pressure, interest group influence, donor influence, political convenience, or personal reasons. Lastly, the media has the ability to control narratives and can highlight important issues, or unfortunately can lead to the spread of misinformation. The media can be a powerful tool for drawing attention to an issue and influencing the opinion of those ingesting the content. While a combination of the public and lawmakers help to decide the agenda, lawmakers get the final say in what issues will be addressed and ultimately have the most power. The substages of agenda setting illustrate this dynamic. Essentially, you can break down the agenda into two sides: the public or systemic agenda and the formal or institutional agenda. The public agenda consists of issues the public deems of requiring action from the government. Lawmakers will consider this agenda when forming the formal agenda, but they also consider factors outside of constituent pressure. These outside factors can prevent issues that are important to the public from making it onto the formal agenda. For example, Pew Research finds that 63% of Americans believe it is the government's responsibility to provide healthcare coverage for all. Yet, even as we try to cope with an unprecedented health crisis, This topic seems forgotten by lawmakers. Policy formulation is a very important step because it's where the details of a policy are ironed out. It overlaps with agenda setting as different parties from public and private organizations and constituents offer solutions to a problem. It can also merge with agenda setting because typically when a problem is identified, talk of possible solutions is quickly initiated. Lawmakers want to be able to offer a solution to a problem before introducing it to the formal agenda. Some actors involved in policy formulation besides lawmakers and the public are bureaucrats, think tanks, and interest groups. Ideally, lawmakers will consider different solutions and analyze them to identify which solution is best and most efficient and feasible to carry out. It's very important to offer input at this stage because lawmakers are not experts on every issue, especially state legislatures for whom this is a part-time job. Often lawmakers can benefit from residents sharing data, personal stories, and experiences. And even if they are an expert on your issue, providing them with your perspective will only help them to create more inclusive policy. This is also the step where lobbying comes into play. In the past 2 years, $90 million has been spent by interest groups lobbying the state government. Additionally, former legislators are allowed to become lobbyists as long as they refrain from lobbying state government officials for 1 year. However, during this year, they can lobby municipal and congressional officials, as well as bringing clients to their firm. So while you're making your case to legislators, there are also interest groups trying to build relationships with lawmakers and influence their decisions. And if they have former legislator working for them, they have an advantage in their connections. This is not to say that all lobbying is bad, but more to highlight the factors that you should consider when pitching your policy solutions. We're all also well aware that our state and national lawmaking bodies do not represent the diverse experiences of all Americans. Therefore, when lawmakers are formulating policies, they are not creating procedures with the full knowledge of the effects of the implementation of those rules are going to have on different populations. In light of this, I want to provide you all with a visual makeup of the Connecticut legislature based on race, ethnicity, and gender. This data is from the National Conference of Legislators from the year of 2020. So 82% of legislators are white, 9% are Black, 6% are Hispanic or Latino, 1% are Asian or Pacific Islander, 0% are Indigenous, and 1% are multiracial or other. 33% of legislators identify as female, and 67% identify as male. And to my knowledge, no legislator identifies as trans or non-binary. If you're interested in any other demographic details I didn't cover here, you can visit ncsl.org. What this data reveals is that, intentional or not, legislators are formulating policies heavily influenced by white male experiences. That is why it is so important to educate your legislators on how specific issues affect you and what policy solutions would mitigate these effects. We're going to go through an example later that illustrates the consequences of formulating policy that is informed by one type of experience. So that brings us to framing your issue. We will continue with the steps of the policy process in a moment, but I thought it was important to address this before we move on to the next step. So framing applies to both agenda setting and policy formulation. When identifying problems or offering solutions, it's important to consider how you're framing your issue because it shapes the potential solution and who's responsible for it. We also have to think about what legislators are considering when creating policy. Does anyone have a guess or want to come off mute and say what they think the #1 factor that policymakers consider is? All right, that's okay. The #1 is cost. It's going to be how much money it will require. Additionally, they will be considering political, administrative, and technical feasibility, as well as time constraints and sustainability. For example, tobacco use and gun use could be framed as an individual rights issue needing protection or a public health and safety issue that needs regulation. And what I find to be personally effective is considering all of this proposed solutions or any solutions you can think of, including your preferred solution, and writing out a list of the pros and the cons. You can then use these comparisons to show why your solution is best. If your proposal is more expensive than other proposals, you will want to justify the cost with any potential benefits you can think of while highlighting the negatives of other solutions. Cost will always be a barrier you're trying to overcome, so it's vital to emphasize who will benefit, when they will benefit, and how they will benefit. Additionally, you should be asking yourself, why is this important now? And how can your proposal be informed by comparable actions taken on this or similar issues? There may be another state or local government that has had success addressing your issue and might help to inform your solution. And one last thing I will mention here is that bureaucrats tend to favor incremental policies. This is because it's easier to introduce a change that only slightly shifts away from the current program or status quo, especially from an evaluation standpoint. However, incrementalism has been criticized as a way to keep white supremacy and the patriarchy in place. If your policy solution is not incremental, remember to think about the best way to frame it so the incremental option does not seem as effective as what you propose. All right, and so once we get to the legitimation stage, the policy has already been decided and is now a matter of if it becomes law or not. If it becomes law, it is legitimized and has legal force behind it. Typically, this happens when both chambers of the legislature pass a bill and the governor signs it. Policy can also be legitimized through the judiciary as well through court decisions. Lastly, policy can be legitimized through bureaucracy and by building it into rules and regulations. Public confidence in the policy can also indicate how respected an institution is or how legitimate their power is. So this step is a good time to create media attention to try to sway public opinion on whether the policy should be passed or not. When the final decision is up to lawmakers, they may be influenced by the positive or negative attention the media is putting on the policy. And later in the presentation, we're going to talk about some actions you can take at this stage and other stages in the policy process to advocate. So the implementation stage is where the policy takes effects and bureaucratic administrative tools are used to carry it out. This is when the policy goes from big ideas to little details, like how frontline service providers will execute the policy. Effective policy implementation is dependent on informed policy formulation. A well-designed policy is more likely to be well implemented. For example, if policymakers took time to consult with frontline service providers who know what strategies will work best, the policy implementation will be well informed. On the other hand, a poorly designed policy will never be implemented well. So when making a policy pitch to lawmakers, it's important to keep in mind how the policy will be implemented and what key details lawmakers are going to need to know. It's also important to understand the top two ways implementation is typically done. A top-down approach is what it sounds like. The few residing at the top create the implementation process for the policy. This results in a faster policy process since there are only a few people to decide details. However, the process is unidirectional with no room for information to flow back up to the top. The success of the implementation is dependent on the capacity of legal frameworks and the capacity of the agencies who will be enforcing the policy. Obviously, the issue of communication with those on the bottom can result in ineffective policy implementation. Those who carry out the policy day to day, as well as those who are the policy targets, may have valuable input on implementation that could go unheard. In contrast, the bottom-up approach brings people involved at the ground level and groups targeted by the policy into the implementation process. These stakeholders reach out to their networks to bring in anyone who would play a role in the planning, financing, or execution of the policy. In this way, both people at the top and bottom are part of the process. In this view, policy implementation and policy formulation are inseparable, as all parties must be consulted about the implementation while the policy is being formulated. Consider these approaches and which you think would benefit your policy solution most. The last step in the policy process is evaluation. The government and stakeholders come together to analyze information and about the impact and implementation of the policy. They then use this information to assess how successful the policy has been. Policies can also have unintended interactions with other established policies, and it's up to the evaluators to determine which policy should be adjusted and how. The evaluation stage will yield a decision on whether or not the policy needs to be changed or is making the impact that was intended. And if a policy does need to be changed, what is the specific issue? Which brings us right back around to problem identification and agenda setting. So the cycle is complete. Now, it's rarely a neat cycle like this, but this is the easiest way to think about it and understand how the process works. All right, so now we're going to take a look at an example of what a policy was intended to do and the actual outcomes. So in this article, Reaching Too Far, How Connecticut's Largest Sentencing Enhancement Zones Missed the Mark, Legal Director for the Prison Policy Initiative, Ms. Alex Katstrua, explains how a Connecticut policy solution failed to consider equity and became ineffective. So Connecticut wanted to discourage drug activity in places where children were present. Most people would agree that keeping drug activity away from children has a positive net benefit to society. All right, so we've done agenda setting, we've done step one. So now how is policy formulated to achieve this goal? In this case, the chosen solution was to create enhanced policy zones within a 1,500-foot radius from schools, daycare centers, and public housing. Basically, what this means is there is a zone around each of these areas where there is now a mandatory minimum sentence for drug-related offenses. And to give some perspective, 1,500 feet is about the length of 4 football fields. So just picture how far that is in your mind. There's some obvious issues with this policy solution. It fails to consider density, or the difference between rural versus urban areas. In urban areas like New Haven, Bridgeport, and Hartford, daycares and public housing are more frequent and much closer together than in rural towns like Bridgewater, Canaan, and Union, where they only have about 1 to 3 of these zones in the whole town. In high density cities, these zones can overlap and cover almost the entire city, as you can see in the map of Hartford zones. So the 2 issues with this policy solution are: 1, covering a whole city in enhanced sentencing zones this large does not act as a deterrent because the penalty applies to almost the whole city. In fact, according to Katstrua, 94% of Hartford's residents live in enhanced sentencing zones. So instead of creating harsher penalties for drug-related activities around children, they just created harsher penalties for drug-related activities. Second issue is racial equity. So redlining in Connecticut led to residential segregation by race, where we see higher populations of white folks in rural areas and higher populations of BIPOC folks in urban areas. Take Bridgeport and Bridgewater as examples. Bridgewater has a population of just under 2,000 and is 90% white. Bridgeport, however, has a population of 145,000 and is made up of 3% Asian, 32% Black, 41% Hispanic, and 20% white. We can clearly see a difference in how this policy affects these towns. There's only 1 zone in Bridgewater where there is a higher penalty for engaging in drug-related activities near children. In Bridgeport, 92% of residents live in enhanced sentencing zones. Again, now any drug-related activity has a harsher penalty. Black and Hispanic residents engaging in drug-related activities in Connecticut are far more likely to face harsher punishment than white residents engaging in the same activity. In creating the how, policymakers lost sight of the goal. They created a solution that did not address the problem. This example highlights how important it is to understand how a policy will be implemented when it is being formulated, and why inclusive policy formulation is critical to advancing equity. It is also worth mentioning that this policy was first enacted in 1987. So even though there has been ample time to evaluate the policy and make changes, those changes do not appear to have an equity focus. And part of the reason that policies like this one exist is because they are broadly informed by white experiences. The system is set up in a way that white experiences are centered, while all other experiences are not only disregarded, but systematically prevented from being included. In a study done by the Brookings Institute, they found disparities between Black and white students' civic scores has grown since 1998. Black students were far more likely to say they had never participated in mock trial, written to a representative or local newspaper, or gone on a civics-related field trip. It can be difficult to become civically engaged if you haven't been regularly exposed to the complicated and often intimidating processes of government. And like any specialized field, there's a certain language that is used that you're expected to just know in these spaces. And if you don't, it can be discouraging. Pew Research finds that Black and Hispanic folks use public transportation more than white folks. However, historically, public transportation developed alongside racist zoning policies that was geared towards white people living in the suburbs, creating inefficient transportation within cities. It's difficult to be civically engaged when there's no easy way to get to your location, the commute takes too long, or transportation isn't reliable. BIPOC folks are also paid less than white folks and are often overrepresented in low-paying jobs as compared to white folks. These jobs are more likely to have atypical shifts outside of the 9 to 5 and can be more physically exhausting, so people might not have the time or energy to dedicate to civic engagement. Black and low-income students are also more likely to lack internet access at home, which can prevent them from getting involved in less time-consuming online advocacy. Language is also a significant barrier to involvement for those not fluent in English or who use ASL. The prerequisite of fully understanding English and all the specific terms around civics prevents people from engaging before they can even begin. And lastly, it is exhausting to engage with institutions or political bodies that are apathetic to your needs or dismiss your experiences entirely. Many empty promises have been made and follow through is non-existent or completely ineffective. It's hard to be motivated to want to give your time and energy to participate in a process that disregards your input. So it's a system that keeps white experiences centered and prevents the experience of BIPOC folks from being incorporated into the process with the same ease. To dismantle this system, we need to address education disparities, transportation disparities, wage disparities, employment discrimination, resource accessibility, and facilitate a social shift in about what issues we prioritize. Recognizing these barriers is important because we won't be able to make meaningful change without understanding what stands in the way. In saying that, I would still like to provide you all with a variety of advocacy strategies, then you can decide if any of them are right for you and your cause. So there are several stages where it's appropriate to advocate: agenda setting, policy formulation, and implementation. The actions on the slide can apply to all these stages except for attending a public hearing or submitting testimony, which only can be done during the policy formulation phase. If you'd like to learn more about testifying at public hearings, you can watch Democracy 101, Testifying at Public Hearings on Everyday Democracy's YouTube channel. Other actions you can take are writing op-ed letters to the editor on issues you care about to your local newspaper. Be persuasive. Explain why you care about this issue and why it needs to be addressed now. Include a way people can contact you or an action they can take, which can be as simple as joining a Facebook group. You can also post on social media. Canva is a great tool to make infographics about the issue. You can send the post to your friends who can post it as well, because the more times people see the same thing, the more they're going to remember it. If you don't know what to say or post, go through your own dashboards and see what jumps out at you. What language grabs your attention? Is there an image that captures your eye? Even ask your friends what they pay attention to most. You can also try to reach out to people you know in the community and tell them why you care about this issue. You could hold a meeting to have a discussion about the issue and what others think needs to be done. The Free Center has spaces in Hartford and Middletown that community members can reserve for free if you're looking for an in-person space. If not, Zoom is a possibility. You can email your legislator, email them again, create an email template for your friends to send, stay in their inbox and make them pay attention to you. Reach out to organizations in your area that specialize in topics and see if they have resources to support your goals. Our guest speaker, Civic Ambassadors, will be expanding on some of this coming up. And these are all great actions to take, but some are more attainable than others. Time is a valuable and scarce resource, so it's important to know the capacity you have as an individual to dedicate to advocacy. A great way to start is identifying 1 to 2 topics that are most important to you. Then start by setting aside 30 minutes to an hour each week to dedicate to advocacy and write it down in your calendar. Then think about what skills you have. Do you like to write? Are you a good relationship builder? Do you tell stories well? Or do you have an eye for design? Think about where your strengths lie and use that to inform which strategy you will choose to start with. If you're a relationship builder, start making connections in your community. If you're a writer, start an outline for an op-ed. If you're savvy with social media and design, create some posts to share. And if you have a lot of connections and time to organize a protest, by all means do that. Whatever you do, keep your strengths and limitations in mind. Don't overwhelm yourself. You won't be as effective as an advocate if you're burned out. And most importantly, do your research. Find the most convincing data, statistics, and anecdotal experiences to apply to whichever strategy you choose. Remember, you will likely have to inform legislators about your issues. Explain the history of your issue, how it became an issue, and how it affects people. The history piece can be very important to understanding why issues need to be addressed in the way you are proposing. And I would like to end this presentation with a podcast recommendation for you all. It's called Advocacy Bites, and it's described as a podcast about 2 accidental education advocates, what they've learned, and how you can get involved in making your corner of the world a better place, whether you have 1 minute or an hour. I think it's a great podcast because the 2 women are just people who never thought they would become advocates until they started learning more about the education disparities in North Carolina and were motivated to take action. They provide some great steps to take when you're first starting out, and they talk about how they've approached talking to legislators. I think it's worth a listen if you're feeling apprehensive about advocacy in any way. And with that, I would like to thank everyone so much for their time and attention listening to this presentation. I hope that you've all come away learning something new. I am now going to pass this off to our Civic Ambassador, Danielle Hubley, to talk about how individuals and advocacy organizations can connect. After Danielle is done, we will welcome Antonia to speak about her advocacy experiences, and then we will end with a Q&A session. So just a little bit about Danielle. Danielle graduated with a Bachelor in Social Work in 2017 from Eastern Connecticut State University, and went on to receive her Master in Social Work with a focus on policy practice in 2018 from the UConn School of Social Work. From there, she was hired by the Partnership for Strong Communities in July 2018 and as a policy analyst, responsible for analyzing and synthesizing data and information about local, state, and federal housing policy issues as it relates to making homelessness a rare, brief, and one-time experience in Connecticut. Born and raised in the state, Danielle has dedicated her career thus far to making Connecticut a better place to be. She's inducted as a Civic Ambassador at the 2018 Summit and has been helping encourage others to participate in our political process ever since. All right, so I am going to stop sharing and pass it. Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, Danielle. Take it away.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for having me here and for bringing us in to be a part of this conversation. I work with the Partnership for Strong Communities, as Jackie mentioned, and I am a policy analyst there. I work predominantly with the Reaching Home campaign, which is a collective impact campaign to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time in the state. So I'm going to talk about in my section what ways you can engage in the legislative process with advocacy. And I'll share some examples from how we operate that within the Reaching Home campaign. So the bottom line of what I want to share with you all today is the importance of sharing your story. And I find this quote to be really impactful and has inspired me consistently in the work that I do. So I feel it's important to share with all of you. I will drop the links in the chat momentarily, but this is an article, and it is a fantastic article about how a theater group engages in advocacy within their community. But the director of the theater, Melissa Nussbaum-Freeman, wrote in this article, change in a community relies on private people making their experiences public and sharing it in the community embracing that. It helps communities become more united because people can hear their stories and realize that they're not alone, and to hear themselves in other people's stories. So I think that's really the crux of what advocacy is meant to do, share experiences to help affect change on a very broad level. And I'll get into more how we do that within the space of homelessness and making homelessness, as we call it, rare, brief, and one time. And we say that because homelessness is a nuanced issue. There's always going to be an instance where an individual or a family falls into the experience or the crisis of homelessness. So our system is designed to always be responsive to when those needs come up. The way we approach solutions is that folks who enter into homelessness only have a rare experience of homelessness, a brief experience of homelessness, and an experience of homelessness that is one time. So just to clarify, when we say we're ending homelessness, we mean that we are preparing our system so that folks do not stay homeless if they have to have that experience in the first place. So moving on from there, can I really make a difference? The answer is yes. You absolutely, as an individual, as a group, as an organization, can make a difference. And the ways you can go about that are broad. So I share a few examples here, like testifying at public hearings, and that's one that I'll get into more specifics on. I broke it out into roughly 4 steps that I feel are helpful as you're working to draft testimony or prepare to testify at the legislature. You can also call an email, which is something Jackie shared earlier. I'll also add that you can attend in-person or online gatherings as they're happening. Usually, folks who are organizing those events will extend invites to local representatives to make sure they're aware of these issues. And this is really helpful for legislators to know what their communities are talking about. And they're also there at the legislature to be responsive to what their constituents or the folks who live in their region are saying. So it is their job to take what they're hearing and push that agenda at the legislature on your behalf. What we work to do at the partnership is help make sure that they're as informed as possible about what their communities are hearing and how it's impacting the state as a whole. So these relationships are super important, and I'll continue to reiterate the importance of keeping those relationships and working alongside your legislative leaders through this process when session happens every year. So when we're talking about testifying at public hearings, the first step is really knowing which legislative committees have influence over the legislative priorities you're coming to speak on. So there are different legislative committees within the Connecticut General Assembly, and their responsibility is to hold public hearings on different issues that are raised in advance of and at the beginning of the legislative session, and knowing what power each committees hold, and if you have any representatives who represent you directly who sit on those committees, means you can better tailor what information you're sharing with them and what your message is to each of those committees. I'll share all these links at the end because I don't want to distract from my presentation and try and get in the chat. But I'll send those all to you to have to look at after. But this link sends you to the Connecticut General Assembly's website page, which talks about what each committee has authority over and who sits on each committee as far as legislative representation. So this is really important as we're thinking about who we need to target and have conversations with during session. Our legislative agenda, our goals for advocacy during within the Reaching Home campaign during session are generated by work groups within our campaign. So when Jackie was talking about the top-down and bottom-up approaches to creating policy changes or to helping to influence policy changes, we work with work groups who have representation from state agencies, local community organizations, direct service organizations, folks with lived experience. So we're trying to bring as many different perspectives to the table as possible to help us craft what issues we're going to advocate for on behalf of the state and what needs we're hearing come up locally so that we can have those conversations with the legislature. So when we go in as an example, this year we are pushing currently for the Department of Housing to create a standing line item that will be in the budget every year for the Department of Housing that supports the homeless response system, that structure that we've set up over the last 12 or so years. It's right now discretionary funding, which means every year we have to go to the legislature to ask that they increase or maintain the funding that we received the prior year. What we're hoping to accomplish is that every year this money is just set aside for the homeless response system, which means that we are often working with the appropriations committee because we are asking for money for that system. And the appropriation has subcommittees. Conservation and development subcommittee is the one that we advocate for when we're talking about items within the Department of Housing. So a little bit in depth of how we engage our process and how we choose where we share our message at the legislature. But this first step is really important in thinking about your strategy and who you need to be communicating with to see the most effective change. So next is finding information on when public hearings are going to be happening and any relevant data or information that's helpful to share to legislators when you're crafting your written testimony or your spoken testimony for these public hearings. So I'll offer that many advocacy and policy organizations, including the Partnership for Strong Communities, track hearing schedules and provide templates or talking points or both to help people in the community make it as easy as possible for folks in the community to submit testimony on the issues that are important to them. And I share an example above or over to the right of my screen, talking about what we, an action alert that we put out, to encourage our advocates to go testify on behalf of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services budget. So we had a few items that we were looking to advance within the Department of Housing or Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, also the Department of Housing. But this hearing in particular was the Appropriations Health Subcommittee, and therefore they were covering the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services budget adjustments that were happening this session. So we had our advocates prepared to testify on the items in our agenda that they elevated through the work groups that relate to the Department of Mental Health and health related appropriations needs. So I include a link to the action alert that we sent out. All of the blue lines in this agenda or in this action alert link to information or resources for you as you're preparing your testimony. Beyond information like this, a quick Google search will also accomplish this. There's a lot of great information, resources, and details to include in your testimony that can come from other organizations, can come from published research, can come from local advocates talking about the issue in the community. Whatever form it takes, it's helpful information for your legislative leaders to have when they're making these important decisions. And I also include a link here, which again, I'll share in the chat for you all. We worked with our lobbyists at Gallo and Robinson as the lobbying organization we partner with, and they put together a document, a quick fact sheet, one-page document on how to navigate the virtual session. Just goes into a little bit more detail since we're still in that mostly virtual setting for this session. It's been a helpful resource for us, and I know we've shared it with other partners. So if it's something that helps you, I am glad to hear that. Step 3 is helping to inform the bigger picture. So legislators are thinking about their districts, but they're also thinking about the state that they represent. This means that they appreciate being able to see what data, research, and concerns are being raised in public hearings, and what their constituents in particular are vocal about during the session. As I said before, they're most responsive to the folks in their district, or your representative leader is responsive to what you are experiencing in your community. So it's really important that they're hearing from you and also that they know what problems you're facing. But I will say that a lot of the times that organizations, advocacy, policy organizations put out talking points, they don't on their own capture the human experience. What we put together for our advocates captures what's happening at the state level. We share out resources on what data and information is available to us at the statewide level and what that impact is. But those tools that we provide are really only successful when they're paired with somebody's lived experience. And what I've written here down at the bottom is what's most important is that your elected leaders know why you find an issue important and how that change would positively or negatively affect you. So when we go to the legislature and there's a bill that we're looking to testify on, we'll determine as an organization what we feel the policy or the bill in particular is advocating for, if it's a positive change to the system, or if we feel it's a negative change to the system, why we feel that way. And then what we do is we share out our perspective on that and encourage our advocates to say, yeah, this is a problem. This bill would be problematic, because we know that I'm not coming up with a great example on the top of my head, but it's important that your legislators know if a bill that's being proposed works or does not work and how that will impact you in your daily life. That's really what they're there to do and be responsive to. So I really wanted to reiterate that message. So a lot of times I'll reiterate, advocacy organizations will help to inform the bigger picture. They'll share what's happening on a statewide level, but it has to be in addition to what folks are saying locally and on the ground and in their everyday lives. Step 4, and this is something that Jackie said earlier, and I'll reiterate again, is to keep building this muscle. The fun is never ending when it comes to public policy. We at the partnership spend all year preparing for and engaging with the legislative leaders during and beyond session, which means that there's, for an individual or different organizations who are interested in these advocacy opportunities, there are so many different ways to get involved. There are so many places you can engage with advocacy, even if it's just having this conversation at your local library or sharing resources with some friends or encouraging someone to testify on an issue that you think impacts them or that they have mentioned they're impacted by. The most important thing is that you keep doing it and you'll find more comfort with it. As Jackie said as well, sometimes the language of the legislature can be a little bit removed from the way we speak in everyday life. So the more times you engage with it, the more comfortable it becomes, the more familiar it becomes to you, and the easier it is to just, be a person and share your experiences with your representatives and help use that as a tool for change. So there's always ways. There's testimony. You can submit op-eds on your own or in coordination with others. You can call your legislators or their aides directly. You can write them letters or emails. But no matter what form it takes, as long as you're engaging, you're helping move us towards the changes that we want to see for Connecticut, and helping to make it a more livable and enjoyable place to be. So I said a lot here, and there's a lot of details, not only within the advocacy space, but also within our work within the Reaching Home campaign. So there's a lot to discuss around housing and homelessness. There's a lot to discuss beyond that, but if you're interested in staying engaged with the work we're doing at the partnership and within our 2 campaigns, feel free to, I'll share this link in the chat. You're welcome to sign up for our newsletters. This will share action alerts like the example I showed on a previous slide, and or other resources that help support folks during or beyond session. We share opportunities to participate in local events or any news that's coming out of local conversations that folks are having as it relates to housing and homelessness. Or if none of that sounds fun to you, you can also just call me or send me an email. I'm happy to chat with folks. I remember when I first started this process, it was super duper intimidating, and I was very nervous and anxious about it, and I found more comfort with it. So I'm always willing and here to help others figure out that process and find your own comfort with it if that is something you are looking forward to. But I want to make sure we have time for Antonia to speak. I'm curious and excited to hear what she has to say, but I'll turn it back to Jackie from there. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was an excellent presentation. It had so much great information. And now we're going to pass it off to Antonia, who has done a lot of advocating at the Connecticut legislature. And I'm just going to do a quick intro for her. So as a family community advocate, Antonia conducts outreach in the communities on a daily basis, meeting people where they're at. She's extremely dedicated with a strong commitment to enlighten and encourage that all voices be heard from communities. She has a strong participation in over 15 boards and organizations, too many to name here in this time. It's a very long list. And her current work with the Greater Hartford African American Alliance and civil rights attorney, Cynthia Jennings, has proven to be of the utmost importance and of great value in the underserved communities of Connecticut. Her most recent accomplishments are the overwhelming requests for her and her daughter to participate in the 2022 legislative session. They are champions in dismantling the racial implicit biases that create barriers in healthcare, specifically for the Black and Brown chronically underserved communities in Connecticut. They are extremely proud to have left an everlasting impression with their testimonies that will have an immediate positive impact. And with that, I'll hand it over to Antonia.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, I'm Anita Edwards. I am a resident. I was born in Boston. However, I've been in Connecticut twice. This time I came here approximately 4 or 5 years ago and have been a family advocate since 1999. My son was autistic. I got into the advocating for children with special needs, had my training in Boston, and I've taken it with me. So when I came to Connecticut, I thought it was extremely important to do something a little different. I wanted to get into legislation. I had been a guardian ad litem in previous years and also a family advocate. I've also, when I was in high school, I was a page and I did a lot of legislation work at the state capitol in Massachusetts. When I came to Connecticut, I immediately saw disparities and didn't understand why anybody else didn't see them or it wasn't highly recognized. And so I started to get into different community groups and different organizations. I started off with CBAC, which is Children's Behavioral Advisory Board. Also, Favorite TT was a very close organization that I was close-knit with. Connecticut Council for Developmental Disabilities, and just a barrage of other organizations, DCF RACs, DCF review panel boards. And I wanted to understand the culture and the policies and legislation here in Connecticut and see why I was seeing what was so different. And the reason why my lens was very significant is because I came from Boston, and Boston was very racist, very segregated, very violent to get that that distinction and that distance for the problems that we had. But we overcame it. And I'm not saying that Massachusetts still isn't racist, but when I came to Connecticut, it's just painstakingly, obviously segregated and racist. And I just think that everybody here had a sense of comfortability and complacentness and didn't really see the disparities, especially the people whom in which I sat on different boards with. And so once I understood the landscape of the net land, I started doing legislation work, and I chose projects that were important to Black and Brown communities. So for instance, the first legislation process we did was racism as a public health crisis. I did that with Senator Armwa. Also DSEC Connecticut, that was something that Sarah Brown and her team did. And that was to dismantle the zoning laws that created Black and Brown people moving into the suburban communities by the old redlining, which was now then used by zoning. My biggest piece is that there was a tragedy that happened since I've been here. My daughter and I tried to get mental health services for my granddaughter, who her and my grandson were in a kidnapping experience in 2017 and hit brick walls all the way. And to be perfectly honest with you, I never had that level of discrimination and racism presented to me as a person. And again, I come from Massachusetts and I thought I'd seen it all. And when it came to a child, and that really hurt me because as a result, I've lost my grandson as a result of it. So I took to I'm boots to the ground or still to the ground. I took to the city to make sure that I understood what the problems were, talk to other people to see if we can implement programs that would dismantle the racism for implicit biases and racial discrimination and preconceived notions for white providers when it comes to Black families. And I know for a fact that that's what we encountered. One of the things that we were told that you speak eloquently, you're too educated, you have too much law or medical in your background. You shouldn't be able to say that as a parent. You shouldn't be able to give us those diagnoses because you're not a doctor. And those are the things that really done to us. And our testimony I sent to Valera and also Jackie, they can give it to you. My daughter's heartbroken, and so I'm trying to get her to heal throughout the process. And I explained to her that out of this, if we can have other people not deal with or not have to face what we faced as far as discrimination and have loss of life or have the feeling that they cannot access mental health services or medical services for them and their kids, that is my reward, and that's what I've done. I have legislators, Senator Kelly from Micah, Summers, Wong, who have asked us to testify and present our situation with regards to the children's mental health crisis, and we did do so, and it was really received very well. Out of that, they're going to raise a bill in honor of my grandson's name to honor him and create a task force so that this dismantles the situation. So overall, I fight for everybody, and I just want to make that clear. I'm not a racist, I'm not prejudiced, but I clearly see where we have the chronically underserved communities of the Black and Brown community. And I personally, if I have to live here, I'm tired of pretending that it doesn't exist. So I'm the type of person that I'm going to fight for everybody. However, I am Black, I've been discriminated against, I've had a loss of life as a result of it. So I teamed up with different people in different communities. I'm not a city person, I'm a regional person. I go all over Connecticut, and I basically listen to people and I want to find out what's important to people that have lived here. I mean, I've only been here for 5 years. This stuff has been going on way before I've gotten here, and COVID just really unveiled the disparities that exist. I am connected with a dynamic group in Hartford, and it's called the Greater African American Alliance. And I think I've been with them since last summer. These are professionals in the community. They come together every Saturday and they speak about the different issues in Connecticut. There's an educational committee, there's a public health, public safety committee, there's the legislation committee, and then there's a public health committee. And we do a whole meeting, saying from 10 to 12, and then we have an after party to discuss things off the record that we think that are really important in the community. And I really encourage everybody, Black and Brown, and we do have white people that participate as well too, as allies, to join it. We need more of these organizations in our community, because my question is, where's the Black and Brown leadership? Where is the Black and Brown people speaking up? And that's the first thing anybody who knows me has already said that. I'm tired of being in rooms and environments where I bring a situation to the table and then I say, well, so-and-so said, or I know this to be true, and then I don't have the soldiers behind me fighting the fight. So all the battles that I've done by myself because they affected me, and I know that if I got them done, it would be a better situation for my people. But I really need people in the community to start speaking up and start talking about the things that are affecting them. And I know people have specific issues that they're concerned about, but when you join organizations like this, you'll find that there's other people in that organization that may have some of the same similar issues you may have, but you don't get anything done really if you're not a united force. And so I think the government here is so used to people not complaining, not saying anything, and legislators not being confronted with issues in the community that they become really lax and complacent. So you don't have to be hostile. You don't have to be, protesting and setting things on fire or anything. Emails, as I mentioned earlier, testifying. When you bring your lived experience to the testimonies, these people are listening. They want to hear from you. They want us to say something. They want us to kind of challenge them. And when they don't, it's just like, well, I have to put this policy or this legislation in process because I have nothing else to back it up, not to be able to do. So I found that every legislator that I've confronted or been in contact with has been very inviting, has been very open, looking for ideas, looking for stuff to do. And I just think that, you know, in order for us to change the narrative in Connecticut, because I mean, I don't have any intention of leaving anytime too soon, you have to speak up, and it has to be a joint venture. And so I'm asking everybody, you know, I've lost life. I've presented myself. I put myself out there by myself and my daughter, whatever, to make a difference for other people, because we don't have any more children. So the mental health bill that's being passed is for your kids. It's for your grandkids, because I don't have any grandkids anymore. And so therefore, I just want to ask you guys to please, when you see something on the legislative calendar, speak up. You don't have to do a testimony, you know, on Zoom, or actually for CGA, you can submit a written testimony that shows your voice. Sometimes I get very disappointed when I'm on a hearing. I don't see any Black and brown people. And it's really shocking to me. It's really shocking that nobody has any issues that they want to raise publicly. However, behind the scenes, that's all we hear and talk about. So I just want to give my personal experience. I come from the ground. I'm not a major organization. I'm a grassroots organization. I commend and take my hats off to the major organization that I'm tied to, the Greater African American Alliance. And I was able to learn from a professional side in interests of other people who are in the community, who have lived this for centuries and for generations, what's going on in the community. So I strongly suggest that you guys get in contact or connected with an organization that's in your community, regardless of what it is, and you guys start, you know, getting your minds together as to what you think is important and start fighting for those things. And when I say fight, I mean hostile fight. I mean, stop presenting them. There's so many legislators that are looking forward to people in the community giving their lived experience. And you can tell me your story, I can tell them about it, but it doesn't make a difference if they haven't heard it from yourself. I told my lived experience, and I'm proof in the pudding. The legislators, when I told them my stories, they did exactly what I wanted them to do. And I said, fix it, and they're fixing it. And so the bill that's being raised, 5001, for you know, children's mental health is being activated now. They've had the hearing last week, and out of that, the bill that will be honored for my grandson, the raised bill, the information will be given out shortly. So that's me in a nutshell. Anybody have any quick questions? I'm willing to answer them now. I know you guys have a Q&A at the end, but I have to go. And that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you so much, Antonia. And yes, please, let's open the floor to any questions anyone has for the three of us. I do know that Antonia has to leave promptly at 2, so if you have any questions for her, it's probably best to ask those first.
I'd like to also add that I recently decided to get employed with 211, and I think that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions with 211. 211 is the informational reference resource data bank. And so a lot of people think that if they can't get something immediately, whether it be housing or whatever, a tangible item, that it's not, I'm saying, of any benefit to them. 211, now that I'm here, because I wanted to find out what the disconnect was, is the most informative database that we have. If you need anything, whether it be clothes, shoes, food, legal services, whatever, contact 211. And what I found is, since I've been there, a lot of people will talk about the end result. I need a place to stay. I want a place right now. But that may not be the story behind the story. If you start talking to the people and explaining to them, whoever answers the phone, exactly what got you to that point, what you need, whatever, there's a wide variety of resources for you. And just because you can't have that one tangible item, whether it be immediate low-income housing or immediate, we're saying EBT or immediate this or that, you have to be able to tell the whole story, because we're able to give you multiple resources to put things back together for yourself. And I know that a lot of people were affected by COVID, and people were affected in different ways. And so it's just really important that we utilize this resource. And that's why I'm there. I'm there to make sure that I understand that these resources are being connected to people in my community, Black and brown, because for some reason there was a disconnect and people gave up on 211, and I didn't understand that, because I was referring people to 211. And I think that the issue is that you have to be very honest and very clear with the person who you're speaking with, and not make it about one issue, or I don't have any money today, or I need a low-income house today, and be open and receptive to all the resources they have. We will empower you to advocate for yourself, because that's what it's all about. We don't give you the resources, we empower you and get you to advocate for yourself. And that's one thing that I want to bring to the community. And I plan to stay there to make sure that that's done.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Antonia. Oh,
I
please
have
go
a
ahead.
question. Sorry.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I commend you for all of the work that you're doing. I'm Janine McMahon. I live in Hartford, work in Hartford. I work for Catholic Charities. I'm a parent leadership coordinator, and my question to you is, one, and you might have said it because there's so much rich information that was shared. It's like so much to take in. But one, did you have any like formal leadership training that you've done? And the reason why I ask is because in our leadership training at Catholic Charities, like we have like curriculum-based coursework that we put our parent leaders through. And I have a parent and she's amazing, speaks well, presents well. She has a really great story to share. But just recently, there was a testimony that she wanted to submit, and I was helping her to write this testimony, but she didn't want to go, but she didn't want to testify. She just wanted to submit her written testimony, right? And so my question to you is, solidarity is part of your work getting folks to come from behind the screen or behind the paperwork and be more present? Is that kind of like the mission of your program? And how can I get connected with you and get our parent leaders connected with you so they could be more present and just use their voice, you know, more?
So let me just explain something to you. So I didn't have any formal training for legislation until I got to Connecticut. I started off in Boston as a parent advocate and educational advocate for special needs. I was trained by the Federation of Children with Special Needs. This is in addition to working 2 jobs. I worked at night in the ER and during the day in the medical billing department. But I did that because my son was autistic. And in '99, when he was born, it was really unheard of in the Black community to have a child that was autistic. So nobody knew what I was talking about. My family thought it was taboo. So it was like me and my daughter on our own. And I had to really quickly learn what to be able to advocate for him. So when I left Boston, I moved to Virginia, and I was there for 10 years. I became a guardian ad litem. And I wasn't trained to do that either. I just jumped in and did it. So when I came to Connecticut, I wanted to do something different. I'm saying I wanted to be take all the skills that I had and the work experience, because I have a lot. And I wanted to make sure that I understood the lay of the land here in Connecticut. And so I then started getting into the organizations like I met the Council for Connecticut Disability, CBAC, the different regional advisory boards for DCF. And I actually wasn't formally trained to be a leader until I took the Partners in Policy class. And that's it's through the Council for Development Disability funds it. So you can look that up because it's called Partners in Policy Making Leadership Program. And then also KTPP, which is Keep the Promise. They had a legislative leading program when the LOB was open. And I took the first class and a leadership class, but that was probably 2019. All I'm saying to people is I think that our people have this thing where they're looking for leadership. They're depending on leadership to make a difference. And I keep telling people, nobody's going to come save us. And so we're our own leaders. And so I think that people should be empowered their own self and learn how to advocate for themselves and also be able to advocate in the community. My reason for building solidarity is both local and also national. I fight for the bigger piece, the reparations for the Black American descendants of slavery who never got reparations. So on a local level, I fight for the chronically underserved communities, which is the Black and Brown communities, so that we can have the rights to life, the social justice, the social equity, and also economic equity. And so solidarity was created so that it covers everybody. And so people who come to solidarity come because they just want to be able to have the face of me, myself behind us, but I don't train people, I empower them. And so I don't have any formal classes. I don't have any formal legislating. I just coach people. I've talked to people too who want to do testimony. There's like 7 people this year that testified as a result of me, had never done it before. And I talk to people every day at 5 o'clock in the morning before I go to work. I'm like, write this, do this. So it's a balance, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's not that they can't do it, it's just they want that confidence. And some people don't want to personally testify because they don't want their face to be seen or whatever. And that's their choice, I'm saying. However, their written testimony means just as much because the legislators read their testimony. They have to. Once it's marked, once it's in the body of the bill that says testimony, you see a list of everybody's testimony. They have to read it. So written is just as much as powerful as written and personal. So I left my information in the chat, my email address and everything for you. You can contact me anytime if you have any questions. And so again, those are the resources that I use. KTP, which is Keep the Promise. They have a legislation training class, and also Partners in Policy Making is what I did here in Connecticut. And that's what gave me the credentials to do what I do, but I have been doing it anyways. And sometimes,
Got
you
it.
know, it's like some people say it's not what you know, who you know. Here, it's about
Mhm.
the path that you've taken to be validated.
Yeah.
So for instance, a mom who's a homemaker, if she took this class, it has more validity than if you're just somebody who just said, I have 5 degrees. So they here, when you're working with legislators, they want to know what process did you get here? Kind of
Right.
sort of, if that makes any sense.
Lots of sense. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem. Any other questions?
Great, great. Let's just take this opportunity to again thank Jackie, of course, and Antonia and Danielle for this really fantastic webinar. Let's give them a round of applause. They really did a
Thank you,
terrific
everybody.
job. Thank you so much. And please
Yeah.
take a minute. I posted on the chat room 3 links, and I'm going to talk very quickly about them. Take a moment to click on them before we close the chat room and the webinar, because then you will be able to go back and get the information. We want to announce that we're having the 2022 Connecticut Civic Ambassadors Summit on April 28th and 29th at the Hartford Public Library. It will be a hybrid event. So some of you who are not comfortable going to be an on-site event will be able to also attend the event virtually. I am putting the link there for the Facebook information and registration page. There's also information on becoming a Connecticut Civic Ambassador. The 3 outstanding women that you just heard are all Connecticut Civic Ambassadors. And Antonia just mentioned a minute ago that she inspired 5 or 6 or more other people to testify because of her being the role model, being the example. She inspired them. And that is what a civic ambassador does. A civic ambassador engages in their community with public officials, with neighbors and others, but also inspires others to do the same. And so that is, if you want to become a civic ambassador, it's a free membership, it's nonpartisan, and learn more at the website link that I put there, everydaydemocracy.org civic ambassador. And finally, to be able to do these great webinars, we need to learn from you how useful they were, and what were some of the things that we did correctly, that we did well, and what are some of the things that we could improve. So please take a minute to fill out the evaluation survey. I've posted that on the chat room as well. I will post it one more time in case it's lost in the chain of comments in the chat room. So I'll give you another few seconds to do that. And again, want to thank all of you for attending. Thank Jackie, Antonia, and Danielle, and all of you for participating today. And we look forward to seeing many of you at the summit on April 20th, 29th. And hopefully some of you who are not civic ambassadors, I know that most of the ones here are, most of the ones attending today are, but if you are not, please consider becoming a civic ambassador. You'll get more information about the summit and all the exciting other programs that we have for the civic ambassadors. So thank you everyone again, wishing you a great afternoon and a great weekend. Thanks for joining us today.